Montana Territory, 1882. The first time the cowboy saw her, she had a rifle in her arms and blood on her shirt. It was near dusk, and the winter air had already started its slow crawl down from the mountains. Jonah Ellison pulled his mare to a stop at the edge of the pine brake, squinting through the low, amber light. The woman stood over a man's body, her shoulders squared, her face still. She did not look panicked. She looked like someone who had done what needed doing. Jonah dismounted slow, his boots crunching frostbitten needles. "You all right, ma'am?" She turned to him. Her eyes were sharp, dark, unreadable. She looked to be in her 20s, maybe 30, but her face carried too much silence for her age. "I'm fine," she said. "He is not." Jonah glanced down. The man was dead. Shot clean through the chest. "He came at me," she said simply, as though reading his thoughts. "Was trying to take my horse." Jonah nodded once. "You alone out here?" She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "Me and my boys." That was when Jonah heard a small cough from behind a fallen tree. 2 boys, maybe 7 and 10, peeked out. One clung to the other's shirt. "Come on out," the woman called, softer now. They came, shoulders hunched, eyes wary. The older one had a knife strapped to his belt. The younger carried a small sack. "I'm Jonah Ellison," he said, shifting his hat back on his head. "You got a name?" "Francesca Grady," she said. The name fit her strong, with edges. She had a long coat on, patched at the sleeves, and her hair was tied back in a thick braid that looked like it had not been combed in days. "You headed somewhere?" "We were. Lost the trail a week back." She looked at her boys. "We ain't got much left." Jonah did not ask what happened to the boy's father. Francesca did not offer. "Camp's not far," he said. "I got coffee, beans, fire. You're welcome to come." She studied him for a long moment. "I ain't helpless," she said. "I can see that." She nodded once. "All right. But I stay sharp. You try anything, I'll end you." Jonah gave a small huff of breath. "Noted." They walked in silence. Jonah led the way, Francesca behind him with her rifle still in her hands. The boys stayed close to her boots. At the camp, Jonah stoked up the fire and set the pot to boil. He had a little jerky, a little bacon, and some salt bread left over. He gave the boys the biggest portions without comment and handed Francesca a tin cup of coffee. She drank it black, no sugar. "No thanks, sither." They sat quiet under the stars. The boys slept close to the fire, curled against each other. "You there, mother?" Jonah asked. Francesca looked at the flames. "No. There, aunt." She did not offer more, but her jaw tightened. "They were left behind," she said after a while. "My sister. She took off. Left them with a man who—" She did not finish. "I found them." "Took them." Jonah nodded. "You did right." She looked at him then, and something in her face softened for just a flicker. "I do not know how to be soft," she said. "Never had time to learn." Jonah tipped his hat back. "That is all right. I like sharp. Keeps a man alive." Francesca blinked, surprised. Then she gave a short nod and looked back at the fire. They stayed the night. In the morning, Jonah watched her break down her own small camp with precision. She moved fast, efficient, like someone who had been doing this alone for too long. "You got folks?" she asked him, tying the last pack onto her horse. "Used to," he said. "Not anymore." She looked at him, something flickering in her eyes. "You always help strangers?" "No," he said. "Just the ones who look like they've been carrying too much for too long." Francesca looked away, jaw tight. The trail ahead was long. Jonah was driving cattle south by spring, but for now, he had time. And something about Francesca, her grit, the way she held herself like she would never let anything break her again, made him want to stay close. He rode beside her the next few days. She did not talk much, but she listened. The boys warmed to him faster. The older one, Russell, asked if he had ever shot anyone. The younger, Rory, wanted to know if he had ever been in a thunderstorm on horseback. Jonah told them stories at night. Francesca never smiled, but he caught her watching him when he spoke to the boys. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, Jonah handed her the last of the coffee. She took it without a word. "You do not have to do it all alone, you know," he said. She looked down into her cup. "I do not know how to let someone help." He nodded. "Then I'll just keep showing up until you figure it out." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I can see you," he said. "And I like what I see." She stared at him for a long time. Then, with a quiet voice, she said, "I do not know how to be soft." Jonah leaned forward, his voice low. "Then stay sharp. I will love you anyway." Her breath caught. She looked away fast, blinking hard. But she did not move from her seat beside him. And she did not pull away when he brushed his fingers against hers. They sat like that for a long time, fire crackling low, stars watching overhead. Something was shifting. Not fast. But real. And Francesca, knife-edged and guarded, did not push him away. Not this time. By the time the snow began to fall in earnest, they'd made it to a low valley framed by cottonwood and aspen, where the wind softened and the land held warmth a little longer each day. There, Jonah found an old trapper's cabin with a half-collapsed roof and a chimney that still pulled smoke clean. He offered to fix it. Francesca didn't answer, just brought her axe to the fallen timber and started cutting alongside him. On the third evening, with the roof patched and a fire burning inside, Francesca stood in the doorway watching her nephews sleep on a bed of furs Jonah had traded for in Fort Benton the month before. Her hands were folded, her shoulders drawn in slightly. Jonah noticed but didn't step closer. She turned at last. "They haven't slept through the night in months." Jonah didn't speak. He knew better than to name the reason. Francesca's voice dropped. "You think they'll forget?" "No," Jonah said. "But they'll learn how to carry it. Same way you did." "I didn't carry it. I buried it." He looked at her then. "The difference don't always matter." She didn't argue. Outside, the snow came down slow and quiet, thick enough to hush the trees. Jonah brought in more wood, stacking it by the stove while Francesca sat on the floor and stitched a tear in Rory's shirt. "You always sew by firelight?" he asked. "Only when it's too dark to work by moon." Jonah watched her needle move. Her fingers weren't graceful, but they were steady. "You learned that from your mother?" "No. A woman I worked for in Helena. Cooked and cleaned for her. She slept till noon and drank until dusk. But she showed me how to mend." He sat at the table, turning a mug slowly in his hands. "You stayed there long?" "Long enough to save train fare. Then I walked." She cut the thread clean. "I was looking for the boys." Jonah nodded once, slow. "You always know where they were?" "No." Her voice cooled. "But I knew who'd taken them." There was nothing he could say to that. He didn't try. Later, as the fire settled into coals, Francesca stood by the window, arms crossed. "I meant to keep going. California, maybe? Start over. You still could." She turned. "Could I?" Her voice held no challenge, only weariness. Jonah held her gaze. "If that's where you need to be. I don't know what I need." "That's all right." Francesca looked back out at the snow. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." She laughed once, low and surprised. "You don't talk like other men. I don't ride with other men." She watched him for a long moment, then walked past him and opened the cabin door just enough to let in a gust of cold air. She stood there breathing it in like medicine. "You miss solitude?" Jonah asked. "No. I miss not needing anyone." He leaned back in his chair. "Maybe you still don't." Francesca shut the door gently. "Then why haven't I left?" Jonah didn't answer. He didn't need to. She crossed the room and laid Rory's mended shirt beside his sleeping form. Her fingers brushed his hair, careful and unsure. Jonah rose to bank the fire. "We'll need more meat come morning," he said. "I'll hunt. I'll go with you." He looked up. "You trust me in the woods?" "I trust myself." He smiled at that. She didn't return it, but her eyes lingered on him a second longer than they needed to. In the morning, they rode out before the sun crested the pines. Francesca tracked a small herd of mule deer along the frozen creek. She moved with quiet precision, rifle slung across her back, eyes scanning the brush like she could see things he couldn't. At midday, she motioned him still, then crouched and pointed. Jonah followed her lead, and they dropped a buck clean through the ribs. No wasted shot, no mess. Francesca stepped forward, pulled her knife, and set to cleaning it. Jonah didn't offer help until she asked. When they finally loaded the meat onto the pack horse, Jonah broke the silence. "You always that sure of your shot?" She wiped her blade on the snow. "Only when it matters." They rode back with the sun behind them, casting long shadows across the trail. Francesca didn't speak until they reached the rise above the cabin. The smoke from the chimney curled like a ribbon into the slate-colored sky. "They're warm," she said, mostly to herself. Jonah nodded, watching her. "They're safe." She turned in her saddle. "So am I." She didn't say more, and he didn't press her. That night, as the boys slept and the wind rose outside, Jonah laid another log on the fire, while Francesca sat sharpening her knife by the hearth. "I don't know how to be gentle," she said, voice low. "Not with what's left of me." Jonah knelt beside the stove. "I don't want gentle." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Then what do you want?" He reached out, slow, and took her hand where it rested on her knee. "I want real." Francesca didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his, rough and warm. "You'll get that," she said. "But it won't be easy." "Doesn't have to be." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at him again. "All right." And for the first time since they met, she leaned in, not out. The days turned longer, the light stretching out over the valley like it meant to stay. With each sunrise, snow slipped further down the mountains and the ground began to soften beneath the hooves of their horses. Francesca took to waking before Jonah, moving about the cabin with a quiet rhythm, feeding the boys, stoking the stove, checking the traps they'd set along the creek. She didn't ask him to stay, but she didn't tell him to go either. One morning, while she was laying out strips of venison to dry on the rack he'd built, Jonah stepped up beside her with a folded piece of canvas in his hands. She glanced at it. "What's that?" "Blanket roll tore. Thought I'd patch it while the light's good." She eyed the needle and thread he'd already worked through the fabric. "You sew?" "Not well," he said. "But I do what I can." Francesca gave a single nod and handed him the knife to trim the frayed edge. She didn't ask why he was still there. He didn't offer a reason. That afternoon, while the boys played in the shallow meltwater near the edge of the woods, Francesca leaned against the fence Jonah had repaired last week. Her braid hung low over her shoulder, streaked with ash from the morning's fire. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, eyes on the cottonwoods. He adjusted the collar of his shirt against the breeze. "I used to think I'd die on the trail. Alone, somewhere between towns no one remembered. You still carry that?" He paused, then shook his head. "Not since you." She turned toward him, uncertain. "You don't know who I am." "What I've done. I know what I've seen," he said. "And I ain't interested in what the world said you were before." She looked down at her boots. "I've taken things. Lied. Fought harder than I needed to." Jonah stepped closer, not touching. "You protected 2 children. Built a life out of nothing. That's what I see." Her jaw tensed. "I don't need saving." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm still here." Francesca exhaled slow, her shoulders dropping a little. "I don't know how to want someone without needing them." Jonah's voice was quiet. "Then want me anyway." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, her hand reached for his, unasked. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep with their faces still damp from creek water and laughter, Francesca sat by the fire with a piece of leather in her lap. She was carving something by lamplight, her knife slow and sure. Jonah watched her from the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of weak coffee. "What are you working on?" She didn't look up. "Rory lost his belt. Thought I'd make him one." Jonah nodded. "You ever take time for yourself?" She paused, then resumed carving. "Didn't think that was something I'd earned." He stood and crossed the room, crouching beside her. "You've earned every quiet minute this place gives you." Francesca looked at him, her eyes steadier now. "You say things like that and I don't know where to put them." "Don't put them anywhere," he said. "Just let them be true." She set the leather aside and touched his face, her fingers calloused and unsure. "I don't know what comes next." Jonah leaned into her touch. "We build it. One day at a time." Outside, the wind had settled. The trees stood still in the dark. Inside, with the fire low and the boys safe in their bedrolls, Francesca let herself lean into Jonah's warmth not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. And that made all the difference. The thaw came slow, peeling winter back inch by inch. Mud clung to the wagon wheels Jonah had salvaged from an old freight wreck 3 miles north, and the creek swelled past its banks, carrying away what the frost hadn't buried. Francesca stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the water chew at the earth. She hadn't spoken since the night before, when Rory woke crying and she'd held him until his breathing evened out, her face unreadable in the firelight. Jonah found her there, coat unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to her elbows. He stopped a few paces behind. "You ever seen it flood?" she asked without turning. "Near enough once. Back in Nebraska. Took 2 oxen and a month's grain." She glanced over her shoulder. "I don't like the way it sounds. Like it's trying to pull something under." "It'll settle down," he said. "Just needs room." Francesca nodded, but her jaw stayed set. He stepped closer. "You're thinking about moving on again." She didn't deny it. "I hate feeling still. Like the land might swallow me if I stay too long." Jonah looked out at the creek with her. "Then let's build something that don't get swallowed." She turned then, her eyes searching his face. "You want to stay here?" He shrugged slightly. "I want to stay where you are." She folded her arms. "I don't know how to build something with someone. I've only ever built to survive." Jonah let the silence stretch between them before he spoke. "Then let's build slow, so nothing breaks when it leans." She let her arms fall, fingers curling around the edge of her coat. "Russell started calling you uncle when he thinks I'm not listening." Jonah smiled, faint and crooked. "He's welcome to it." "I didn't tell him to," she said. "Didn't even know he'd started." Jonah waited. "I thought it would bother me," she added. "That he sees you as something fixed. But it doesn't." He didn't answer, just stepped beside her, facing the water. "I don't know how long we can keep them safe," she said. "The world don't stop being cruel just because we found a quiet spot." "No," Jonah said. "But it's easier to fight it with someone at your back." She looked at him, not guarded, not soft, just there. Present. "I've been chased before," she said. "By men, by hunger, by the kind of fear that eats you from the inside. I don't run anymore. But I still keep my boots ready." Jonah met her gaze. "Then keep them close. I'll ride beside you, wherever you go." She breathed in slow, like the weight of that promise settled somewhere deep and unfamiliar. "If we're staying," she said, voice lower now, "we'll need more than meat and firewood. There's an old garden bed behind the cabin. Looks like someone tried to grow corn once." "I passed a wagon in town," Jonah said. "Sacks of seed under a tarp. I'll trade for what we need." Francesca nodded. "I'll clear the bed. Teach the boys to plant proper. They've never stayed anywhere long enough to see something grow." She stepped forward, hand brushing his as she passed. "Come spring," she said, not quite smiling. "We'll see what takes root." Jonah watched her walk back toward the cabin, her back straight, her pace sure. Later, while Jonah sawed new handles for the water buckets, Russell came up dragging a rusted horseshoe he'd found near the woodpile. "You think we'll be here long enough to need luck?" the boy asked. Jonah took the horseshoe, turned it in his hands. "I think it couldn't hurt." Russell nodded and ran back toward his brother, who was digging holes for the first row of beans. That evening, Francesca sat at the table, sleeves rolled again, marking out rows on a scrap of old paper. Her braid was looser than usual, and her voice was steady as she listed what they'd need: salt, flour, oil, maybe a new kettle if she could find one that didn't leak. Jonah listened, added what he could remember, then reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. She stilled, eyes meeting his. "You don't have to ask to stay," he said. "I know. You don't have to change anything about who you are. I know that too." He leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers. "Then what do you want, Francesca?" She closed her eyes, breathed him in like she was learning the shape of something new. "I want a life that doesn't vanish if I blink too long." "Then we'll build it," he said. "One fence post, one seed, one morning at a time." When she kissed him, it was quiet. No rush. No fear. Just the sure, steady press of someone choosing. And this time, she didn't pull away. By late April, the ground had warmed enough for planting. Francesca stood in the turned soil, sleeves rolled above her elbows, her hands streaked with dirt as she pressed beans into the earth alongside Rory. The boy was quiet, his small fingers careful. Jonah watched from the edge of the yard, the hem of his shirt damp from the morning dew, a coil of fencing wire slung over his shoulder. Russell was inside, mending a tear in his boot sole with a needle Jonah had shown him how to thread. He hummed under his breath, a tune neither Francesca nor Jonah knew the name of, but it carried easy through the open door. "Hold the seed like it matters," Francesca said softly, crouching beside Rory. "Like you want it to trust you." Rory blinked up at her, face sun-dappled. "Will it know?" She touched his hair lightly. "It'll feel it. Everything alive can feel care." Jonah turned back toward the pasture. The fencing had to go up before the cattle arrived from the trader down in Judith Basin. He'd arranged the exchange quietly: a single mare and a winter's worth of pelts for 3 head, enough to start a small herd. Francesca hadn't asked how he managed it. She simply nodded when he told her they'd be delivered in a few weeks. That night, the 4 of them sat around a stew pot thick with lentils and the last of the dried venison. Francesca's knees brushed Jonah's beneath the table, but she didn't move them. The boys argued over who had dug the straighter row in the garden, their voices overlapping, laughter sparking between them like dry pine catching flame. Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Jonah stepped outside to check the traps near the shed. Francesca followed, her shawl trailing behind her in the wind. She carried his hat forgotten on the peg and handed it over without a word. He set it on his head, then nodded toward the open field. "I was thinking about building a smokehouse. Down by the creek cut." She looked toward the slope. "You planning to keep staying?" "I already am." Francesca folded her arms. "You still never asked me." "I didn't think I needed to." She studied him in the moonlight. "Maybe I wanted you to." He stepped close, the night still around them. "Francesca Grady, will you stay with me? This cabin, this land, this life? Will you let me be the one you build with?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes. But not because I need to. Because I want to." He reached for her hand, warmed by the kitchen fire. "That's all I ever hoped for." She leaned into him then, her brow resting against his chest. "I don't know what I look like in love." "You look like this," Jonah said. Steady. Still. They stood beneath the stars, the wind tugging gently at the trees, the cabin behind them glowing gold through the window. By midsummer, the garden had taken root in full. Corn rose high and strong. Francesca worked beside Jonah to split beams for a new lean-to. The boys added to the chicken coop with scavenged planks. The cattle arrived at last, dusty and lean-legged, and Jonah set about running fence while Francesca taught Russell how to boil down lye for soap. One morning, as Jonah lifted a sack of flour onto the porch, he turned to find Francesca watching him, her hands in her apron pockets, a faint line of sunburn along her neck. "I wrote to the circuit marshal," she said. "Told him I took custody of the boys. Asked it to be made proper." Jonah set the sack down. "You'll need someone to sign with you." She nodded. "Already added your name." He blinked. "You certain?" Francesca stepped forward, her voice even. "You've been their kin longer than anyone else ever tried to be." Jonah felt the weight of her trust settle deep in his chest. "Then we'll raise them right. They're already better for having you." She paused. "So am I." That evening, they sat on the porch steps, the boys asleep inside, the land stretching before them in golden hush. Francesca leaned her head on Jonah's shoulder, and he laced their fingers together. "You ever think about adding to this family?" she asked. He looked down at her, surprised. "I mean," she cleared her throat, "if we ever wanted to. We've got the space now." Jonah smiled, slow and sure. "I'd like that. Whenever you're ready." She closed her eyes. "I think I'm already there." Summer passed into autumn, the leaves turning copper and gold. The barn stood finished, the fence held strong, and the smokehouse cured meat slow and steady. Francesca taught Rory how to patch a saddle strap. Jonah showed Russell how to aim clean with a bow. They did not speak of the past anymore. It had taken what it wanted. The rest was theirs to claim. They married in October, beneath the cottonwoods that once lined the swollen creek. The boys stood beside them, each with a carved wooden button on their collars. Francesca wore a dress she'd sewn herself from muslin she'd traded for in town. Jonah trimmed his beard and wore clean boots. There was no preacher. Just vows spoken plain, with the land as witness. Afterward, as the dusk fell and the fire crackled low, Francesca sat with her head on his lap, her feet bare, her voice quiet. "I never thought I'd be someone's home," she said. Jonah brushed a thumb along her cheekbone. "You've been mine since the first fire we shared." They stayed like that until the stars came out. And they stayed, year after year, through storms and seasons, through growing boys and early mornings, through every quiet evening that followed. They built a life not from softness but from steadiness, from choosing each other over and over. And they never once needed to run again.